circumstances. To me, that meant things like, starting with choosing a database or something like that, for instance. My kind of knee-jerk reaction was go with Postgres. Why not? You're building a new application, there's no reason not to. But being deliberate, I wanted to make sure that I had actually exhausted all of the different possibilities, and I knew that that was absolutely what I wanted to be going with. So you kind of cycle through, okay, well, why not MySQL, why not MariaDB, why not drop SQL entirely and go with Mongo or Cassandra, or, we're doing GraphQL, so why not do a graph database like Neo4j? There's a number of these different things to consider. And ultimately, as I kind of went through and analyzed each different possibility, a lot of questions came out of each one of them. Not all from myself. Of course, you come across all the Stack Overflow questions and start to see a number of them were just completely unanswered. A lot of more experimental stacks, you find often there's just not solved solutions. There are not solutions to some of the problems that arise when you're building a real application with it. So after all of that research, I ended up coming back to what was initially my knee-jerk reaction of Postgres. But at that point, I had a new insight into why I wanted to go that route. And essentially, it was simplicity. It was fundamentally the simplest thing to build with, given the set of circumstances that I was functioning within. And the final one was to build for the now. Yeah. So another thing, as developers, we tend to over-engineer the crap out of things. You start with something that's just really, really basic, and you'll build an enormous system out of it. But I'd challenge all of you on that to kind of reconsider what hacky means, because I think often it's actually a very good thing. I think hacky, as kind of a term, is applied to just using one shell script instead of building a new web app around it or something like that. Often, especially when you're in the startup world, is the best way to go. When time is your most valuable commodity, building a quick hacky solution that just meets your requirements, or using something that's sort of off the shelf that just meets your requirements, whatever it is. You don't have to necessarily build everything. Often are the most valuable kind of shortcuts you can end up taking, rather than actually over-engineering something without knowing what your correct abstractions should be down the road, or what the actual outcome is going to be for the product. Yeah, so the other thing I ended up learning a lot about was just kind of my own working style and how to improve on it. After having gone through that whole burnout thing, I was kind of like, okay, I don't want to be back there. I want to build a new company, but in a way that it didn't fall into the same traps that I had before, noticing kind of how I like to work on things. So I came up with a few rules for myself that hopefully are applicable to some of you as well. Although I'm sure not all of you will sort of identify with each one of these, but hopefully one or two of them could be good takeaways. Number one, I kind of discovered when I became a lead at Shopify, which was, as I was kind of on the verge of this burnout, I started thinking a little bit more about, why is it that other people that are in similar positions are not doing that? And I was thinking, like, how is it that they're able to get their work done when they're not working as many hours? And, I was working crazy hours at the time. And I think that was kind of the answer to itself. It kind of became obvious after a little while that I was just working hard and not smart. I was not sharpening the saw, as it were. So one of my kind of realizations was that a lot of people that were in these, developer leads meetings or UX leads meetings or product leads meetings or whatever, were often, married or had kids or something like that. And I'm not saying that that's, a requirement or anything by any means. But one of the characteristics of that is that they often have responsibilities at home that are these external constraints that they need to factor into their lives, into their time and their availability. So if you don't have that, for me as a single guy, I had to come up with my own. I needed to start actually tracking my time and set minimums and maximums with something like rescue time. to make sure that I wasn't overworking, a certain amount of time, and make sure that I was actually focusing on the right things and being more effective with my time. The second one here, again, seems super obvious. A lot of these things really do, but they're really not. You're not a brain on a stick. Yeah, essentially we are animals. We need to drink water. We need to eat food. We need to have social activities. We need to have hobbies and things that allow us to kind of completely disengage from what it is that we work on during the day. And yeah, take that time to sharpen the saw and yeah, have some fun. This one, it seems simple, and I assure you it's the simplicity on the far side of complexity, to go back to that quote. Everyone is responsible for their own happiness. When I became a lead, one of the things that was just hammered into my mind was essentially that you're responsible for everybody on your team. That if something is going wrong, that you have to be there to support them. And I mean, to an extent, that's absolutely correct. Of being empathetic and supporting your team to the best of your ability and everything. But when I was having one-on-ones where you go in and people are just breaking down and bawling over stuff that's happening at home, and you're trying to support them and all that. If you're bringing all that home with you, if you're not able to kind of separate yourself a little bit, you need to be able to. So you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt, I guess, and acknowledge that ultimately you can be there to be supportive and be empathetic to these people, but you're not the be-all, end-all sort of responsible entity for their existence. So, without further ado, the TLDR, the final kind of takeaway, everything in moderation, including moderation itself. I think that's kind of the one unifying thing that I found through all of these experiences. Between working at Shopify and going into the startup world, being deliberate, all of these things are kind of derived from this, I find. You need to find that balance. Of course, there's going to be times when you need to just go hard and sprint on something, and you need to just put your head down and work on something. But you need to balance that out. Otherwise, it's not going to be this sustainable approach, and it's going to end up hurting you in the long run. So that's it. Yeah, thanks. I've got some questions here. I'd be happy to answer some of those right now. Yes, that's
Whose dog is that?
That's for Jason. I've been trying to convince Jason to get a dog for a little while, so just something for him to keep his eye on. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, what's up?
Great present, Reg. Thank you. Quick question, actually, and this came up literally in your closing. Now, you talked about your time as a lead at Shopify and having to look after your team, and walking into a room and your member of your team is like bawling in front of you, and you have to go into whatever mode you use. How are you going to handle that with a remote team when there's a crisis and then it's like boom?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Of course, you always hope for that. You're never hoping that you're going to go into a meeting like that. But it does happen, and essentially, all you can continue to do is, in that meeting, you're there, continue to be supportive, do whatever you can, but you also have to be able to say, okay, that night I'm not going to be stewing on it over and over and over, because that's not productive, right? That's not going to help everyone. Carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders does not help you actually get anything done, even for that person. In fact, it's actually quite the opposite. And if you're not worried about it as much, then you're actually able to think and provide more constructive solutions. So I'm not saying there's a silver bullet there, but trying to be able to kind of extract yourself a little bit and separate and just know that I'm going to go for a run after work, and that's going to be like when I separate from work and try to have my own time, as if you have other responsibilities that you need to be pulled away for. If that makes sense.
Yeah, cool. I just want to put you on the spot with your team here.
Sweet.
Any other questions? No? I'm going to bring the mic over because I'm a nice guy.
Hello. Hi. Follow up about your note on being deliberate. Is that kind of avoid being the fashion of tech, or could you elaborate?
That's a great question, actually. Yeah, so not to say Maurice wasn't, but yeah, I think I have mixed feelings about this. On one hand, I think there is an enormous amount of value in trying to follow what's happening in tech and just be aware of it. But I'm absolutely not saying to just go with it. I think having an awareness of all of these things, and it's one of those things that I guess comes with some experience as well, is that the more collections of, or the more awareness you have of different approaches to solve a problem, the more you can identify what the correct approach is for a particular situation that you come across, right? Once you reach a problem, you say, okay, I've got this kind of mental toolbox of these 20 different approaches to solving this problem. Which one fits best right now? So, yeah.
Like for your situation specifically, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the difficult part of it, is that the kind of trendiness of it, especially, particularly if you're working in the JavaScript world, there's a lot of the trendiness in it. The new framework announcements and all that kind of stuff, of course. So I think there's value in following along with those things and understanding what kind of unique value prop is for every one of them. But at the same time, is any one of them going to solve your problem? Well, maybe, but it's worth kind of considering what the unique characteristics are of your problem, and then kind of working back from there. It's kind of a roundabout way of make sure that you're solving the right problem first, and then you can solve the problem.
Questions. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Day one, what did you do?
Day one, what did I do for Jupyter?
Yeah.
Started. Yeah, I went fetal. No, it was honestly just research. I think the first, you can actually see like in my GitHub contributions as well, it's kind of like, okay, here's the day that we started, and there's just kind of like nothing for the first few days, and then there'd be like one commit here, and then one commit there, and it's just kind of like a gradual ramping up, because there was a lot of research involved in it, and I think that was, kind of representative of that being deliberate and making sure that I was making the right choice. It's also a super intimidating choice to be making. I mean, complete greenfield, brownfield scenario, and you're saying, okay, what is the best ORM to use, or whether or not to use an ORM or whatever else, and I think people here have thoughts on that. But, just trying to choose every single thing down to, some of the smallest libraries, and trying to keep things small as well, not just going with, oh, this solves my problem, so therefore I'll add it to my project. But trying to look through and understand what's going on in that project and say, is the cost of adding this dependency worth maintaining this dependency forever moving forward, and that kind of stuff as well. So there's a lot of just research that went into each individual piece of it.
Follow-up question. Yeah. What did you do today, 6 months later?
What did I do today? I tried to put together a talk.
Oh, yeah.
Actually today I was working on, I was building a whole new project from scratch, which is a new deployment system, so fascinating new stuff. Any other questions?
Hi. I just found that what you mentioned about, instead of delivering a MVP, you guys are probably doing a more feature-rich
minimum
product. Yeah. So I guess, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Maybe, I guess, is that also along the line of your be deliberate philosophy? Thanks.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we assumed going into it, that was maybe a faulty assumption, was, well, not necessarily an assumption, but kind of a bias that we had, I suppose, was that coming from the tech world, if you're releasing a product that's going towards a very tech-oriented audience, there's a certain assumption that once you roll something out, it's going to be constantly updated and more features are going to be added and everything like that. But the particular nature of what we're working on is, well, it's a somewhat naturally viral kind of product where once it goes out into the world, it kind of spreads very quickly. And we wanted to make sure that when it did spread, it actually had all those features, because a lot of the people that were going to be picking it up were not as kind of tech focused. So we wanted to make sure it actually had the feature set that every one of them would need and identify with right off the bat, so that they wouldn't kind of pick it up, say, oh, this doesn't have feature X, and then kind of delete the app. So we wanted to make sure we kind of hit all of those main points. And of course, it'll be constant iteration after that, but once we have what we have, or what we've considered to be kind of our minimum lovable product, then we'll be able to release it all at once and hopefully impress. Sure.
When it comes to working with a remote team, how do you manage communication, keeping things like running smoothly and maintaining the culture between your remote employees and your in-office employees?
That is a great question. We're very early on. It just started actually in January. So this is a whole new thing for all of us, and we're still trying to figure it all out. Obviously, one kind of quick pro tip here is get everybody together in person occasionally, hence why they're here. So I think that's kind of a part of it is honestly just meeting in person every once in a while, because I think there is a lot of value to that, of being able to just have an in-person interaction, get to know somebody in real life. But on the flip side of that as well, part of the value of remote work is that not everybody kind of likes working in that sort of environment. So that is just kind of like you do check-ins on Slack and that kind of stuff, as well as eventually doing, like, I haven't gotten into this yet, but the one-on-ones where you're doing kind of hangouts or whatever else to do a video chat and kind of checking in on obviously more than what the product is about, but TBD, I guess. Open to suggestions. Yomi.
Hey, Rick.
Hi.
Since you said you're open to suggestions, I actually run a remote team, and there are different types of people and the way they want to work. What I've found that works for me the most with people in my remote team are like people that are self-directed and just needs to be shown the way. So what I make sure is, I have a roadmap, I have a list of things that needs to be done, I have a task list of some sort, and they just, go through it, and we have regular check-ins, sending PRs and reviewing them every now and then.
Yeah.
And then give feedback and things like that. So that's what I spend most of my time doing, defining the roadmap, defining what needs to be done, and then every now and then, say twice a week, we check in or something like that. And that has worked for me. I've done that for 2 years now.
Exactly. Perhaps you can touch on that, but as kind of part of our hiring process, I think that was kind of one of the characteristics that we were really after, is that well, I think probably the thing we emphasize the most is that we're looking for learners, people who really enjoy learning, and that tends to kind of be correlated with people who are somewhat self-directed as well. But the learning mentality, I think, is a really valuable one. It's how Helen and I have both worked on this for a little while and kind of gotten to where we're at. Just because if you're naturally interested in something, you're going to be constantly learning about it. And to your question as well, that's how you end up kind of accidentally, not accidentally, but over time picking up more of these tools to work with as well, and you get more familiarity with things, and you have more possible approaches to solving problems, more kind of diverse solutions, I guess, to solving things. So I think that was definitely part of our hiring process as well. Not so much to speak to the question specifically about communication and coordination kind of stuff. I think that's one of those things that kind of comes a little bit more naturally for remote work. As long as people are naturally motivated to learn and curious and everything.
I have
two separate questions.
Yeah.
First question kind of touches on your work-life balance comment. I think if you work for a startup, especially a VC-funded startup, there tends to be very intense timelines. Sometimes you have to grow your team very quickly. You're on the line to deliver something in a very short amount of time. And a lot of startups pride themselves as like, oh yeah, we live for the hustle, we rise and grind, we work 7 days a week. So how do you factor work-life balance into that? Is there a solution other than not accept VC?
I mean, again, I'm not going to claim to have some silver bullet that's like a solution to everybody's problem on that by any means. But yeah, that kind of is what I meant by like the hustle porn, right? Is the move fast, break things, and all that kind of stuff. And I think there's a balance to be found where to some extent that's valid. In a startup scenario, frankly, there are times you're going to have to work really hard. That's kind of hard to get around that. The trick, I think, is finding those outlets, finding those ways that you can kind of keep yourself charged to some extent, and identifying ways of making sure that you're not in a constant sprint mode, right? You need to be able to recharge, and that honestly does not mean, if you're in your first 3 months as a startup, that does not mean taking a 2-week vacation or anything like that. That can mean, take a Saturday and go for a walk and go for a hike somewhere. It can be little things like that as well, where you're just taking a little getaway here and there that help you completely detach from your work environment. And then obviously just trying to take care of yourself as well, getting as much sleep as you can.
Totally separate, unrelated question. For the Shopify Garage projects, did Shopify end up continuing on with any of those projects, getting IP, developing, commercializing any of those ideas?
So some of them, I think, were sort of born and died during my time there, I think, as well. Some of it was just kind of wacky ideas, and I think a lot of that is just sort of the nature of the wacky stuff that I was working on. A lot of what I was doing, even though it was just a team of one, like I was the only person on this team, a lot of what I was working on was kind of modeled after companies like X, which is like an alphabet company called Google X, working on these moonshot ideas that inherently are unlikely to be successful. But if they are, then they're incredibly valuable, right? So by nature of that, a lot of what you're working on is going to be discarded, and it's not going to end up, amounting to anything. I think there were a few things here and there that I was working on that may end up being used in future apps or future experimental things, including, in some cases, just some of the things being used for like IRL events in real life. Like conference type scenarios or trade shows, essentially, where you set up some sort of complex booth and you need to impress people with kind of some fancy new technology or whatever. You can kind of make these things as one-off events. So none of it has, as far as I know, really made it into any kind of like major production environment or anything like that, because a lot of it is still pretty far out from being in that situation, and a lot of it is dependent on stuff that hasn't really come to market yet. It's been dependent on future tech that does not really exist yet, that has not really been built out yet. So, yeah. Cool. Any questions? Nope. Cool.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.